theme of this meeting that we're having now is reclaiming the sacred balance, restoring Wahutawin, or Alo Latina in the Dene language. What we have tried to do over the last little while with Keewaydin Tribal Council is include and make sure that the Dene voice is included in in all of the activities that we are working on. So for us, it acknowledges something that happened over 300 years ago, long before Canada became Canada. Some of the ceremonies that you see when we have our gatherings are from long ago, and we continue to practice them today. Back in the 60s, a group of leaders from Manitoba went to Ottawa to meet with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And they were told that if you no longer practice your culture, if you no longer speak your language, you have no business coming to me to talk about treaty rights. So that's what this restoring the sacred balance is about. Identifying, reaffirming, reawakening, all of those things that have kept our resilience through generations. So we can hand that down to this new generation that's coming up. Some of us here are great-grandparents, we're grandparents, we're parents. It's our duty to make sure that the young people know where they came from. Something has kept our people resilient over all of this time. With the arrival of the settlers, the early explorers and the settlers that came after them, there's been much disruption. So our task is to find what it was, what that sacred balance was before that time.
Our theme, reclaiming the balance, I think is very important to what we need to do for our children and to be prepared on how we could help them. Been thinking about the process and what we're doing. You know, getting everybody involved and having our community members attend and listening to what we all need to do to make a change for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. When I first heard about this process, I'll say, let's say, when it first came out, very first time, and thought about having our own way of doing things in a way of our children and protecting them and helping them. That was over, I'd say, my 40 years ago. You know, this wasn't something new that we can think of, but it has grown over the years. And this is where it, has come up, and we finally have we finally have a way of doing it different. We've always had all these things in our, all of the knowledge that we have and that we can pass on to our community and workers. We had, I want to say something about families looking after the children. That was what we did as families in our communities. When our family needed help, we were there to help them, and we encouraged the families. Because right now, the families are being torn apart by what's happening. It is being taken without any communications with leadership and with families, and wanted to keep families together.
Tamis kutastak kuna suena kauna suat tiguak. Sige ma muna minosi noni una suena. E pagani chiga wasisak minoni go mawak. Agata giskinoa matsik minop matisiwin. Kutaki inim matisiwin tagiskinoa matsik mistigusi nigisi. Mageo koni ma puta kawi puta tapas tagani ma wagutuin. For all the people that I didn't understand what I was saying, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Northern Authority, but I'm going to share some of my views on what we're doing. We're trying to help the communities develop their own laws that pertain to their communities, because we're not all the same, and but our languages say the same thing. Our languages speak about the life cycles, the cycles of life, water cycle, the moon cycle. And if you understand those cycles, you begin to think about your family and what Ted mentioned here about the disconnection of families. That was the purpose of the government, to dismantle the family as a unit. So in order for us to become a strong community, we have to rebuild our community, our communities by rebuilding families. Because that's where we're going to become stronger, by rebuilding our families. And we have to understand where all these outside influences are coming from, because we have our own way of giving thanks to the Creator, and we were taught those things by our ancestors, our parents and our grandparents. But the separation of that families and the disconnect, or learning this other culture that came from across the ocean.
So my history is that I'm a former chief of my community for 26 years, a former chief of Splatsin, and it's in the presentation. I'm also a former tribal chief for 12 years. But also I spent 20 years working in the healing and addictions field, working in residential treatment, Round Lake Treatment Center specifically. The philosophy is culture is treatment, and did lots of work with the Community Health Associates. So I've got a background that is about healing and about advocacy for children and families, because they go hand in hand. If we're going to take over children, we need to do healing. And I think it's really, really important part of the process. If you could go to the next slide. So what I'm going to go through with you is our Secwepemc Nation, and where I come from. And it said on my name tag on it, Ontario, but I'm not from Ontario. So I was like, how did I I got transplanted, transferred, and I didn't even know it. But anyways, the Secwepemc Nation is one of the largest nations in British Columbia. 180,000 square kilometers is the territory. It's bigger than 160 countries in the world. We have 32 communities, 17 Indian act bands, a population of about 20,000. So it's a very large nation. And so what I'm going to present to you today is our work of bringing our laws together and how we went about that process. But what we're really doing is we're honoring our ancestors, because the work that we do is really about what this slide talks about, is that our laws existed pre-contact, and you heard the elder talk about that. The things that existed before they came and changed things for us. We had a real complex governance system, kinship system, how we related to each other, how we actually did work, because the governance of our territory was governed not by band councils, it was governed by families. It was governed on a regional basis, because we had no centralized form of governance. The families looked after the territory. The families looked after the land. The families looked after the animals, the fish, all of that. That's what they attacked with the residential schools. When they waged war on our children, they destroyed that. We have to understand that. So we have to pay and honor our ancestors because of the work that they did for thousands of years before the Sema or the white man came along and decided to put us under his wing and become wards of the government. So everything that we know, and you heard the elder talk about it, is contained in our oral traditions and our stories. Our stories that we're going to, and I'll talk about some of them here, they come from the land, and they've been passed down for thousands of years. It talks about how we relate to each other, how do we actually discipline each other, and how we go about that. And so it's really important, the work that we're doing and how we do it in terms of process. Next slide. Where'd you go? Where are you? Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. Got to make sure I can't see the slide, so I think it's the right one. This slide represents the community I'm from, Splatseen. Many of you may know or not know is that our community has operated with our own community legislation since 1980. We forced a process to get the federal government and the provincial government to recognize our jurisdiction in 1980. We did a lot of things to get that to happen. And what it did, it affirmed jurisdiction for our children notwithstanding residency, not this on and off reserve thing. So wherever our children went, is we had jurisdiction for them. And in our process for 40 some years now, 43 years to be exact, is we know where every child is. All over North America, we've been to Alaska, we've been down to Texas, we've been across the country. When our children are in need of protection based on our jurisdiction, we go and we help that child and the family. And so the interesting part is we did this with very little funding from the province and from the federal government. There was resources, but they got all sort of screwed up because of the delegated model they imposed on us, Directive 20-1. But one of the things that it recognizes in our law, there's no resource more vital to our continued existence and integrity of the Indian band than our children. You know, we always talk about our children are our future. And we embedded that in our legislation, community legislation. The children, if we're going to continue as a society, as a community, we need to do and look after our children. It's really important. Next slide. So this speaks to our sort of modern day process for the Secwepemc people to revitalize our law. In 2009, the 17 Indian Act bands got together and signed this declaration, one mind, one heart, one body, one spirit. It began in 1999, but what we wanted was a common nation-based process. Even though we were divided up in all these communities, we wanted to develop a national process for our children, that we would assert our inherent jurisdiction over our children and families. And I think it's really important. It's those of you that are chiefs know how hard it is to get chiefs to agree to anything. But we had all 17 actually sign off and say, yeah, we're going to work together. And I think that in itself was an accomplishment we've built on and built momentum to sort of work together. And we have a responsibility to, in sort of modern day time, to revitalize our law. It has not been lost, it is still there. Next slide.
That was in it for like, who knows how long. And then I got up and I fainted. And then I woke up in the hospital. I thought it was
Okay, so you saw from the video that was just shown, we have a incredibly courageous young lady amongst our midst, and we wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge that courage.
My presentation is called Achamu presentation because I want to just tell you a story I don't want it to be on PowerPoint, because that's not the traditional way of our people passing down the history. Now, in the third part of my presentation, it's called Moving Forward. And I'd like for us today to take the information from the presentation and from each other and learn that what do we need to move forward? What are the things that we're going to have to do to move forward? And I love the idea of what reclaiming traditional knowledge. I love that theory, and I love that, we're finally getting there, getting on with the positive changes, and that's what we need to move forward. We need to empower our youth and our children for them to know that they are worthy of a good life. What I love about our people is they're so resilient, and they have such strength. And I think that's how we have survived all of the things that Indigenous people have gone through. We have survived because we are resilient. And I love hearing the laughter. There's such big laughter when you hear Indigenous people get together. It's that laughter that's kept us going. And I love being a part of it. My sisters are the biggest laughers of all. They make a lot of noise when they're laughing. So that's wonderful. So I'm going to carry on with the first part. I'm going to review the history that I learned from this book. And some of you may have heard it before. Some of you may have been a part of putting this book together. But I'm just going to tell you again, because it's such a story that needs to be told over and over and over again. I'm not going to say it's a happy story, because it's a lot of hardships. So here I go. I'm going to tell you a story about the Ininewak in the York Factory region. So my ancestors are the Gishtiwaskaigan Ininewak, the York Factory Cree. And our traditional territory includes a vast area of land and water along the Kishtikami, that's the Hudson Bay. Archaeological sites along the Kishtikami demonstrates our indigenous habitation going back for thousands of years. This is in keeping with their oral history and traditions that says we have always lived there.
Ani, Torinda Nurstakas, Konkosi, Piedino Jaba, means Luttenstaden. I'm greetings, my name is Tony Mandavan. I am from Konkosi First Nation. I've been a lawyer here in Alberta, a provincial court judge and a federal court judge. And since that time, I've retired, and I'm now associated with Okotowood Lodge, and involved in other activities. But when I was asked to do this presentation, I had been giving it some thought, and as much as I'm very interested in continuing to work in the subject of Indigenous law. In olden times, the First Nations and other Indigenous groups had their own ways of carrying on organizing their society, and that was that dealt with family matters as well as all the other issues that they had to deal with. One of those areas that First Nations took care of was children, and they had, among other things, practiced adoptions in their own way. Now, these custom adoptions were known And when the Indian Act was passed, the Indian Act specifically recognized custom adoptions.
Okay. All right. Can I get just the guy in the hat in the middle? Can you see my slideshow? Put some thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry. Single you out. But thanks everybody. So that was a really good introduction to an overview about how things are going in court. So I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the challenges that people have been having with Bill C-92. And if you want a copy of this presentation, I'll email it to the organizers, and then they can then get you guys copies. All right, so here at Photo Non-Governance Watch, this is our boardroom, where our purpose is we're a university research unit. We were developed out of TRCC Call to Action number 50, which calls for the creation of Indigenous Law Institutes for the development, use, and understanding of Indigenous laws. So here at the Lodge, we support Indigenous communities' goals to amplify, articulate, and implement their own laws. We use wise practices, promising methods, and we do a lot of research and education on different research tools to help communities revitalize their own laws. We've been doing a lot of work around Bill C-92 and laws for communities. We produce useful, accessible, practical legal resources, which I'll go into. We do a lot of public legal education. We follow the principles of Wakuduin and Miawachidwin, and these are the principles that govern the work that we do, how we have good relationships, how we know that we're all connected, and how no matter what group we go into with the community, we will figure out ways that we're connected and usually find a common interest or a cousin or who knows. But these principles guide us in the community that we work with. We don't go into communities unless we're invited. All of the work that we do is based on invitation, so communities reach out to us, and then we see what we can do to support them, whether it's as a phone a friend, or whether they want a research project, or whether they just need a liaison to find a lawyer that works for them, whatever it is, but we're always here to help and see how we can be of assistance. We understand and believe and promote that Indigenous laws need to be treated seriously as laws. Indigenous laws are not sub-law, there's common law and civil law and Indigenous laws. So we don't believe that Indigenous law is sub-law or category B law. It is a law. It is laws. And we conduct our research, our Indigenous legal research, with the same rigor and transparency as we would any other research. And we understand that Indigenous laws are just one aspect of Indigenous government, and it's part of comprehensive whole society. And revitalizing Indigenous laws and legal processes is essential for rebuilding healthy communities and for reconciliation in Canada.